This will not be a speech like anyone I have ever given. I will talk to you today about the failure of leadership in global politics and in our globalizing economy. And I won't provide some feel-good, ready-made solutions, but I will in the end urge you to rethink, actually take risks, and get involved in what I see as a global evolution of democracy. Failure of leadership. What is the failure of leadership today? And why is our democracy not working? Well, I believe that the failure of leadership is the fact that we have taken you out of the process. So let me, from my personal experiences, give you an insight so that you can step back and maybe understand why it is so difficult to cope with the challenges of today and why politics is going down a blind alley. Let's start from the beginning. Let's start from democracy. Well, if we go back to the ancient Greeks, it was a revelation, a discovery that we had the potential together to be masters of our own fate, to be able to examine, to learn, to imagine, and then to design a better life. And democracy was the political innovation which protected this freedom, because we were liberated from fear so that our minds, in fact, whether they be despots or dogmas, could be the protagonist. Democracy was a political innovation that allowed us to limit the power, whether it was of tyrants or of high priests, their natural tendency to maximize power and wealth. Well, I first began to understand this when I was 14 years old. I used to try to avoid homework, sneak down to the living room and listen to my parents and their friends debate heatedly. You see, then Greece was under control of a very powerful establishment which was strangling the country, and my father was heading a promising movement to reimagine Greece, to imagine a Greece where freedom reigned and where maybe the people, the citizens, could actually rule their own country. I used to join him in many of the campaigns, and you can see me here next to him. I'm the younger one there to the side. You may not recognize me because I used to part my hair differently there. So in 1967, elections were coming. Things were going well in the campaign. The House was electric. We really could sense that there was going to be a major progressive change in Greece. Then one night, military trucks drive up to our house. Soldiers storm the door. They find me up on the top terrace. A sergeant comes up to me with a machine gun, puts it to my head and says, "Tell me where your father is or I will kill you." My father, hiding nearby, reveals himself and was summarily taken to prison. Well, we survived, but democracy did not. 7 brutal years of dictatorship, which we spent in exile. Now, today, our democracies are again facing a moment of truth. Let me tell you a story. Sunday evening, Brussels, April 2010, I'm sitting with my counterparts in the European Union. I had just been elected Prime Minister, but I had the unhappy privilege of revealing a truth that our deficit was not 6%, as had been officially reported only a few days earlier before the elections by the previous government, but actually 15.6%. But the deficit was only the symptom of much deeper problems that Greece was facing. And I had been elected on a mandate, a mission actually, to tackle these problems, whether it was lack of transparency and accountability in governance, whether it was a clientelistic state offering favors to the powerful, tax avoidance, abetted and aided by a global tax evasion system, politics and media captured by special interests. But despite our electoral mandate, The markets mistrusted us. Our borrowing costs were skyrocketing, and we were facing possible default. So I went to Brussels on a mission to make the case for a united European response, one that would calm the markets and give us the time to make the necessary reforms. But time we didn't get. Picture yourselves around the table in Brussels. Negotiations are difficult, the tensions are high, progress is slow, and then 10 minutes to 2, a prime minister shouts out, "We have to finish in 10 minutes." I said, "Why? These are important decisions. Let's deliberate a little bit longer." Another prime minister comes in and says, "No, we have to have an agreement now, because in 10 minutes, the markets are opening up in Japan, and there will be havoc in the global economy." We quickly came to a decision in those 10 minutes. This time it was not the military, but the markets that put a gun to our collective heads. What followed were the most difficult decisions in my life. Painful to me, painful to my countrymen, imposing cuts, austerity, often on those not to blame for the crisis. With these sacrifices, Greece did avoid bankruptcy and the Eurozone avoided a collapse. Greece, yes, triggered the Euro crisis, and some people blame me for pulling the trigger, but I think today that most would agree that Greece was only a symptom of much deeper structural problems in the Eurozone, vulnerabilities in the wider global economic system. Vulnerabilities of our democracies. Our democracies are trapped by systems too big to fail, or more accurately, too big to control. Our democracies are weakened in the global economy with players that can evade laws, evade taxes, evade environmental or labor standards. Our democracies are undermined by the growing inequality and the growing concentration of power and wealth. Lobbies, corruption, the speed of the markets, or simply the fact that we sometimes fear an impending disaster, have constrained our democracies, and they have constrained our capacity to imagine and actually use the potential, your potential, in finding solutions. Greece, you see, was only a preview of what is in store for us all. I, overly optimistic, had hoped that this crisis was an opportunity for Greece, for Europe, for the world, to make radical democratic transformations in our institutions. Instead, I had a very humbling experience. In Brussels, when we tried desperately again and again to find common solutions, I realized that not one of us had ever dealt with a similar crisis. But worse, we were trapped by our collective ignorance. We were led by our fears. And our fears led to a blind faith in the orthodoxy of austerity. Instead of reaching out to the common or the collective wisdom in our societies, investing in it to find more creative solutions, we reverted to political posturing. And then we were surprised when every ad hoc new measure didn't bring an end to the crisis. And of course, that made it very easy to look for a whipping boy for our collective European failure. And of course, that was Greece. Those profligate, idle, ouzo-swilling, Zorba-dancing Greeks, they are the problem. Punish them. Well, a convenient but unfounded stereotype that sometimes hurt even more than austerity itself. But let me warn you, this is not just about Greece. This could be the pattern that leaders follow again and again when we deal with these complex cross-border problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's migration, whether it's the financial system. That is abandoning our collective power to imagine our potential, falling victims to our fears, our stereotypes, our dogmas, taking our citizens out of the process rather than building the process around our citizens. And doing so will only test the faith of our citizens, of our peoples, even more in the democratic process. It's no wonder that many political leaders, and I don't exclude myself, have lost the trust of our people. When riot police have to protect parliaments, a scene which is increasingly common around the world, then there's something deeply wrong with our democracies. That's why I called for a referendum to have the Greek people own and decide on the terms of the rescue package. My European counterparts, some of them at least, said, "You can't do this. There will be havoc in the markets." Again, I said we need to, before we restore confidence in the markets, we need to restore confidence and trust amongst our people. Since leaving office, I have had time to reflect. We have weathered the storm in Greece and in Europe, but we remain challenged. If politics is the power to imagine and use our potential, well then 60% youth unemployment in Greece and in other countries certainly is a lack of imagination, if not a lack of compassion. So far we've thrown economics at the problem, actually mostly austerity, and certainly we could have designed alternatives, a different strategy, a green stimulus for green jobs, or mutualized debt, Eurobonds, which would support countries in need.